This episode is proudly supported by East Coast Beverages.
So my name's Samuel James Lentini. Really what's special about East Coast Beverages and about what we do is that we are vertically integrated. We grow, we squeeze, we bottle, we blend everything here on site. And not only that, I think what is really special is that all of the bars and restaurants and hospitality venues, they're able to come and visit our site. And once they come to our site, they see what our process is and they can actually see that the lemons, limes and oranges are all getting squeezed here, where we're not using a concentrate that comes from overseas. What is really special is that we invite people to come here. We have events here, and we're a family business, and we're able to really just work off the foundations that my grandfather built many years ago and continue a quality product range.
For more information, go to eastcoastbeverages.com.au.
I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Kaurna people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
We think there's still a lot more to do, and we're very conscious of that responsibility to try and keep innovating and try to keep pushing the industry forward. This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale.
Dr. Mark Krstic is the Managing Director of the Australian Wine Research Institute, or the AWRI. With more than 28 years of experience in grape and wine research and development, he is also a professor at Macquarie University, a published author, and a respected leader across numerous boards, committees, and industry programs. His breadth of expertise positions him as one of the most influential figures in the advancement of Australian wine, and I'm thrilled that he's joining me today on the podcast. Hi, Mark.
G'day, Shanteh. How are you today?
I'm really well. Thank you for taking some time out of what I can imagine is an incredibly busy schedule.
No, look, hey, I'm really happy to be here because today's all about writing board papers, so this sounds much more fun than writing board papers, let me tell you.
Well, somebody's got to do it. And I did want to meet with you because I know the AWRI is celebrating their 70th birthday this year, and what a year to be celebrating a huge accomplishment. But let's go back a little bit because I want to hear about you. Now, you grew up in a beautiful part of the world. You grew up in Tasmania, is that right?
I did. I'm definitely Tasmanian by background. So, look, born in Launceston, in the northern part of the state, but I've lived in many different parts throughout Tassie over the years before sort of graduating uni and leaving the state as well. But yeah, I mean, just to go backwards a little bit, I attended primary school in seven different primary schools throughout Tasmania. So lots and lots of things there. So places like St Mary's, King Island was in there.
Wow.
Windermere, Huonville in the southern part of the state, and South Hobart. But I sort of finished off my primary school in and around the northern suburbs of Hobart and Claremont before sort of going on and doing a lot of my secondary education in and around Hobart and through university as well. So yeah, it was lovely. And my background though, Shanteh, is our family had a significant farm in the northeast part of Tasmania, up around Derby, Windermere, which is very much grazing dairy country at that particular point in time.
And it was cattle, was it?
We had a mixture of beef cattle, so mainly Angus, and also sheep. And we traditionally were probably into wool production at one stage, but transitioned into prime lamb production as the wool industry sort of fell over there in the sort of the 80s and 90s.
And I can't imagine that you went to 7 different primary schools because you were a problem child. What was the reasoning behind kind of moving around so much?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, I don't think I was a problem child either, but no, my father worked in the bank, and during those times it was lots of moves to different branches around Tasmania. So he worked incredibly hard and did a lot of work and sort of worked his way up into the banking sector before we moved into Hobart, and he moved up into the sort of senior ranks within the bank. But yeah, he was stationed at a whole lot of different branches across Tasmania, and in those days the family just followed. And
what was your thoughts on kind of being around sheep and cattle? Did you like that outdoor kind of lifestyle? What were your kind of, as you as a young kid, what would you say were some of the defining moments of growing up in Tassie?
Yeah, look, I was pretty lucky. I mean, I had a grandfather that I thought just had the best job in the world being a farmer and, being your own boss and being outdoors and, with people and with livestock. I thought that was, he was just it and a bit in terms of what he was doing with his life. And, I certainly role modelled that throughout my life in terms of, that kind of link to the land and, what he was doing there. He worked incredibly hard. But I thought to myself, that's the sort of person that I want to be. One day I'd love to be that person that could, have a farm and also, be your own boss and be a part of the land. I think that was really great. And I really loved livestock at that time. I thought, working with livestock is incredibly stressful sometimes, but incredibly rewarding. And I think, that connection to animals and dogs and whether it be sheep or cattle, it was something that I really enjoyed. And I think I just aspired to probably just do something with the land. But, whether it was, kind of working down, as a farmer, but I was the grandson of, of the farming empire, if that makes any sense. And my grandfather had 3 daughters, and I realised soon in my career that I probably wasn't going to naturally inherit the farm, so I needed to think about a sort of a novel way to stay in agriculture without necessarily, having that kind of that direct link to being a farmer, if that made any sense. And so science sort of took a bit of a pathway at that stage.
I think it's funny because when we think, especially as adults, when we think about science, we think about a lot of kind of test tubes and strange things happening in labs, but the science of the natural world. And I remember science in high school and it being absolutely fascinating and really at this insight into the world around us and how it turns over. And I can see that natural link as you're talking about.
Yeah, look, I always loved really understanding how things worked, in sort of biological systems and really, understanding the genetics of sheep and cattle at the time was of great interest, and seeing that improvement and what happened, and also, around the pasture and agronomy side of that sort of stuff. So I always had sort of that natural inclination to really understand how to, how to manipulate and improve those sorts of biological systems. So that's where my sort of science background really came from.
And how did you find that you went at science? Because you were interested, did you find that you had a kind of natural ability with it? And how did that see you through from school into kind of uni?
Yeah, look, I always had a bit of a natural affinity, absolutely, with the biological sciences and chemistry and those sorts of things. I wouldn't say mathematics was definitely the highest, but I remember in Year 9 getting one of those Westpac mathematics competition distinction awards, and I remember when they gave out the awards, the person that was meant to get it, the guy that was always the dux of mathematics, got it. But me standing there next to him, I remember the principal at the time sort of looking at me as to say, "What are you doing here?" But I always had, like I said, a bit of a natural affinity to the sciences. But I would have said mathematics was not necessarily my first thing, but at the same time, did okay.
And so, how did you find university? Did you know exactly where you wanted to go within that? Where did your kind of your furthering in your scholastics kind of take a turn?
Yeah, it's interesting, Shanteh. I shocked the hell out of my mother one day when in Year 8 she came home from work, and I said, "Mum, I've arranged a meeting." She had the day off the next day. I said, "I've arranged a meeting with the Dean of Agricultural Science at the University of Tasmania for tomorrow, and can you take me in there, please? Because I've got an interview with him." So, yeah, I remember sort of going in, knowing pretty early, like I said, that I needed to take a different path in life to get in, to stay in agriculture. And I knew I had a sort of a general affinity at a pretty early age with, the sciences, and just really thought, okay, well, agricultural science is probably the one that I'm going to have the most affinity with. And, sort of already had worked out my pathway into university, if that made any sense, at a pretty early stage in my high school career. And so, went down there, met with the Dean of Science, John Madden, at the time, and he was an entomologist. And again, just, really enjoyed listening and learning about, whether it be about insects or pasture or, like I said, horticulture. It was just all exciting to me. And I remember, going through my Year 9 and 10 in school when you had to do those work placements, and this is before compulsory kind of Year 11 and 12 at those stage. And I remember sort of, making sure I did work placements in the Department of Agriculture and all those sorts of things to really, again, just get myself immersed into what does life in agriculture and agricultural science look like at that particular point in time.
I mean, you rattled this off, but I don't think I've ever met anybody that knew what they wanted to do and a pathway to it at such a young age. I mean, I think a lot of people say, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be this, and perhaps they may go on to do it. But to already know that there's a pathway to that and I need to meet with this person like the dean and this is how I'm going to make it happen, that's freaky.
Yeah, well, Shanteh, it was either that or play cricket for the Australian cricket team was probably the other thing at that point in time. And I probably realised at a pretty early age that there was a lot of other people much more talented than I. So I needed to have a plan B.
Wow. Well, I have heard you talk about a particular professor in your undergrad, Professor Bob Mannery. How did he have an impact in your career?
Yeah, that's, again, early in my university career, again, going into the agricultural science at the University of Tasmania, where you're doing your basic, your chemistry, physics, and the basic chemistry science subjects in university. I was, again, pretty set on thinking about livestock and thinking about maybe either a vet science or an animal science kind of career at that particular point in time. But by the time I made it into, I think it was into about second or third year university, I met with Professor Maneri, and he started teaching some subjects, and he started teaching a lot on plant physiology and how we manipulate plants into doing these sorts of things. And he was right into and on the cutting edge of essential oil research at the time. And I was just so fascinated with the way that he was talking and the passion that he talked about. And he really sort of, I guess, got me quite stimulated in thinking about, plant physiology, plant biochemistry, and that is sort of where I then sort of started to, tune away from the animal science stuff and the vet sort of thinking and then thinking more about the plant sciences. So that's, again, early into my degree, really sort of started, moving towards that. And it was really about his influence. And, he's still around today. He had his 90th birthday last year, he's such a great, passionate guy that really, I guess, influenced the direction of my career for sure.
And have you reached out to connect with him again?
Yeah, I have. I wasn't able to join his 90th birthday down in Hobart last year, but I did send a message which was read out on the day. So, but I try and connect with him whenever I'm down in that part of the world. When I can, but unfortunately not as often as I'd like to.
Wow, that's really cool. And a huge testament to you of what you've achieved in your career for that to be read out at his birthday and to really mean something. So that's really wonderful. I love hearing kind of stories like that. Tell me a little bit about what you went on to do your PhD in and your Bachelor of Graduate Science. Yeah,
so I went on to do honours in and around that sort of essential oil stuff. So working with peppermint and the application of plant growth regulators to change the growth habit and the oil yields of peppermint varieties in Tasmania at the time. And then from there did pretty well with that sort of stuff, and then was offered a PhD scholarship at the time and with a top up from industry, which was really nice. But I actually sort of moved into forestry at that stage because forestry was all going quite gangbusters in Tasmania at the time. So there was a lot of interest in, getting more research and more capability in those sciences around the forestry. So I was very much involved in looking at the propagation of Pinus radiata cuttings at the time, and actually how do we improve the percentage strike and the uptake of those particular cuttings from pine trees at the time, and taking those through and into the field and seeing those move on. Again, my focus, Shanteh, has always been about how do I have use science to give me real world impact. So really understanding how I can really apply those scientific principles to really improve the translation of that science into real world outcomes. So it was great. It was 3.5 years of working with industry partners in Victoria and also Tasmania around, taking, some of the superior genetic strains of the Pinus radiata or Monterey pine, and actually making sure that we get some successful nursery production of those cuttings and those rootlings, and then being able to take those out into the field and seeing those grow into big trees and harvested at some point in the time.
What I love about all of that work is that it's, like you said, it's applying science to then get to a place where you're making change in the world, but it's also doing so with a good knowledge and background of the consequences and the changes that you're doing within the world as well. And especially when you're coming to something like trees or perhaps buying, everything that you're having an impact, you also understand that, if there's something that cutting is taken and it's changed in a certain way, that's going to have a knock-on effect for the rest of the world as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, that applies to what I do today, in all honesty, Shanteh. What I'm doing at the Institute today is really about, how do we take science that we do and, apply that to real-world problems and make sure that we do it. I mean, look, there's a lot of really cool science out there in the world, but a lot of it sometimes doesn't move off the, if I can say, off the shelf and into the industry. So, but I think with AWRI and what we do, we're very focused on taking that really cutting edge science and turning it into some real world solutions.
Well, the AWRI is something that we can all be immensely proud of in Australia. Tell me a little bit about kind of where you first entered into the AWRI and kind of your first impressions of the business.
Yeah, it's a great question. So after I finished my PhD, I went to work as a postdoc in CSIRO, and so and that was up in Mildura, of all places, so in the hot inland areas of Australia, and in grapevine research. So that's where I transitioned from forestry into grapevines, and really spent a long time there working with people that were incredibly passionate about the vine. And obviously wine, but also, also table grapes and dried grapes. So it wasn't just about, my first experience with grapevines wasn't just about thinking about wine. And then after that, I worked with the Victorian government for about 10 years in and around that area too. And, it was just great to be able to learn a lot more about, obviously the wine industry and form all those links all across Victoria at the time. So, and then I went to work for the Grape and Wine R&D Corporation, which is now part of Wine Australia, for 5 years. And again, just understand investing in research and development and there. And in 2012, and look, I'd had a lot of touch points with the AWRI. I think my first touch point professionally with the AWRI was probably in the late 90s. And, obviously a lot of different samples were being sent to AWRI for testing. And I remember one guy in particular who unfortunately is no longer with us. He's deceased, but a guy called Randall Taylor, and just his infectious energy when we're sending these samples in for testing, and he'd get on the phone to you and he'd tell you all the background and and such detail around the technical aspects of it. So that was probably my first interaction with the AWRI, like I said, back in the late 90s. But then, in terms of my working opportunity, I was approached to set up what they called a node at the time, but an office of the AWRI actually just on the outskirts of Melbourne. So that was back in, I think it was back in January 2012, I started working with the AWRI, but based out of, like I said, we established this Melbourne-based office and, basically working closely with the Victorian wine industry in sort of, promoting and getting the services of the AWRI more widely adopted by the sector there, but also involvement in research and development, and also in the extension and outreach to industry on all of those technical things.
Amazing to hear your story and how you kind of came to be, because you kind of look through, your incredible career history and what you've done. And it's always nice to know kind of how the world has come to be and where you find yourself in it. And when you talk through the fact that you were studying essential oils and then, then into trees and then into grapes, and now you find yourself in this wine world, it all starts to make a bit more sense of how, what piqued your interest and then where you went to after that, if that makes sense. So thank you for sharing so much about yourself as well. Tell me a little bit about when the AWRI was established and how it kind of was founded, and then where we're kind of at today. I mean, you don't have to do that whole history of the AWRI, but tell me about how it kind of started up, and when was that?
Yeah, great. Like in terms of the history of the AWRI, actually goes back to about the 1920s. Even though we're 70 years old, and it was formed officially in 1955. The actual story of the AWRI goes back even into the 20s. Would you believe that up until the end of 1924, practically all the wine that we exported from Australia to the UK was dry red table wine. So at that point in time, there was duties on alcohol content that made it too expensive to export fortified wines at that particular point in time. But actually in 1924, the government introduced what they call the Wine Export Bounty Act to incentivise the export of fortified wine, and they actually paid producers 4 shillings per gallon to actually produce that fortified wine. And in 1925, the British government actually introduced a tariff preference, known at that particular point in time as the Empire Preference, which effectively halved the duty paid on wines or fortified wines entering into the UK at the time. So basically what that did is that turned on the tap for the Australian producers to basically go ahead and produce a lot more fortified wine and export those actually into the UK. And, it really drove that financial incentive to do so. So that was pretty nice. But what happened, I guess, as a result of that opening up, that as we dispatched a lot of the wine in a hurry to the UK, a lot of the fortified wines that turned up in the UK at the time actually became what they call diseased, but the nature of that particular disease was poorly understood. And so actually what happened was in 1929, the Wine Overseas Marketing Board at the time, which changed to be the Australian Wine Board in 1936, actually commissioned a bit of work to work out, we need to do some inquiries into what's going on here. And that actually led to discussions with the University of Adelaide at the time, and they appointed John Fornishen at the time, back in 1934, to actually come in and actually look at what was going on with this particular problematic fortified wine entering into the UK. So John Fornishen, again, working with the University of Adelaide at that time. And interestingly, CSIRO became involved pretty soon after that as well, and started contributing some financial. In 1945, they actually took control of some of the investigations and started to share the cost equally with the Australian Wine Board, and trying to work out, again, understanding a lot of the causes to this particular disease wine entering into the UK. So look, I'm trying to cut to the chase here, but that all led to the establishment of the AWRI was because there was some money held in trust from all that money that was being collected from the taxes at the time. There was £500,000 that was actually in a reserve that was held by the Commonwealth Government at the time, and they were waiting for the industry to come forward with a proposal about how best to use that money. And in 1949, actually, the industry came forward with it and said, we would like £300,000 of that to do some marketing. But the Commonwealth Government at the time rejected that. And in 1951, a proposal was submitted around, hey, what about we form the Australian Wine Research Institute? And then in May 1955, the Wine Research Act was passed, and which was the governing legislation that actually then introduced the AWRI. So, it was really nice. Understanding that, it moved from the university, it had some roots in CSIRO as well, but the industry made a decision that they wanted to have control over it, and they wanted it to be more nimble, more focused on impact for industry, and the industry wanted to actually have governing control of that. So that was really the origins of the AWRI.
Incredible. There must be so much about your job where you look back at what the AWRI has done in the past and being part of change and solutions to so many things. That must be very humbling in your role now to see what's come before you. But tell me, how is the board of directors made up today?
Yeah, great question too. I think what's happened now is we really want to see directors. Obviously, we have a mixture now of what we call elected directors and also skills-based appointed directors. So what we do is, again, in terms of trying to keep with the principles of industry ownership, we actually now have 4 directors that are elected from industry. So you can, industry members in these various categories can nominate, and then there's a vote. There's a voting process about them being elected. And what we do is we ask for nominations from the large, medium, and small wineries. So there's, that categorisation is all out there and on our website. And then also now one from the independent grape grower category. So if you can nominate in one of those 4 categories, we then put it out to a vote. And obviously, democracy works well, and we have an election, and then the one with the most votes gets on. So we have, like I said, 4 of our 9 directors are elected, and up to 5 of those are also now appointed. And we what the board does is says we need a certain set of skills around our board. Now, whether that's government relations or finance or university or funding and business development, we actually go out and again run a fairly transparent recruitment process again with people can apply. We have a selection panel that looks at those and then looks to appoint the best skilled directors in those particular categories that we're searching for. So, yeah, we have 9 positions on our board, which are made up of, like I said, either that mix of elected or skills-based appointments on our board.
Incredible. I think that's incredibly important information for when we look at kind of how these things go ahead and how all the different kind of research and development plans that you're choosing to do, but who is behind them and whether or not the right people have a voice. Incredibly important stuff. When I looked through some of the RDE plans, I was, just shocked by some of the breadth, and I'm just going to read out a couple. So in performance products and processes, you've got molecular drivers of wine texture and taste. In customer, consumer and markets, you've got enhancing the reputation of Australian wine through market promotions and activities. And environment, sustainability and natural capital, you have managing the impact of vintage advancement and compression. I mean, this is a company and a business, and I don't know if that's the right word, but that really is looking at the holistic welfare of an entire industry. When you have so much that you're looking through and all of this work that's going in there, is there something that is consistently coming up to the surface as perhaps one of the most areas of concern right now? Or is it all very important work and it's all needing to be juggled around? I just imagine if you've been there for a little while, you must see a couple of things keep raising their head, and perhaps these are things that are not always solved very quickly.
Yeah, look, it's there's so many different areas at the moment that are so critical to really supporting the sector, and look, I'll just rattle off a few, Shanteh, but at the moment, supporting that sector that's trying to really produce some really much better quality, no and low alcohol wine is a real area that's really, taking all aspects of the skills and capability of the team at the AWRI to really try and solve. So that's sensory, it's the volatile chemistry, it's the non-volatile chemistry, involved in getting mouthfeel, taste, texture, and aroma of those sorts of things right. So there's an enormous amount of effort going into that particular category at the moment to see what we can do. But, the team and led by our Director of Research, Marcus Herderick, he really focuses on really trying to understand the fundamental science before we really then try and push it, and try and manipulate that sort of stuff as well. So, really understanding that flavour, mouthfeel, and also the stability. So once we take ethanol out of wine, it becomes less stable. So we, understanding how we make sure that there's good shelf life on those products is also important. So that's one big area. You would have known, obviously, over the last couple of years, especially in the 2020 vintage, Shanteh, the issues to do with bushfires and smoke taint became a really big one as well. So again, the Institute's been now focused for over 20 years on, really understanding, how to assess the risk, and provide good analytics for people who want to send in samples, and for us to give them some guidance on what might be going on in those particular grapes or wine. So that's been a huge area as well. Work that the Institute has done over many years in terms of looking at, obviously, fermentation is such an important area in grape and wine science, and how you turn grapes into amazing wines is really, through using a mixture of really amazing microbes that do a lot of things there to convert the sugars into ethanol and convert the malic acid into lactic acid and the other things that happen through flavour and aroma development. So, the Institute's done a lot of work, and I think we're pretty proud to know that of all the commercial strains that you can buy off the shelf for grape and wine fermentation, so be it, like I said, for the primary or secondary ferment, probably around about 10 or 15% of the strains that are available globally have come from work that's been done and completed at the Australian Wine Research Institute. So we're pretty proud about some of those sorts of things, but there's so many other streams about what we're doing. The other real key point at the moment, Shanteh, is probably just that sustainability stuff at the moment. So really, we coordinate and manage in partnership with Wine Australia and Australian Grape and Wine, the Sustainable Wine Growing Australia program, and that's such a critical program for us to demonstrate our sustainability credentials to, our key markets and exporters overseas.
I could rattle off for days of how the AWRI has changed, the landscape of Australia and what it's done for the world. But tell me, this is your chance to show off. Tell me, what is the global reputation of the AWRI?
Yeah, it's a good question. Not one that I can give you a completely solid answer in, but look, we're super proud. I mean, we're sort of, whatever it is, about 100 people based in Adelaide, a long way away from a lot of other places in the world. But we have really, really important strategic partnerships with the University of Bordeaux and Geisenheim University in Germany, and also many other places around the world. I mean, I'm super proud of when I walk into, other international meetings around the world, and also just for example at the International Office for the Vine and Wine, so the IOV, which is based in Dijon in France, and the level of respect and that they have in the work that the AWRI does in that whole regulatory space, or in how we measure certain analytes in wine. It does have a really impressive global reputation with what we do. So, I mean, like I said, I'm often blown away. And look, I feel like I'm in a bit of a sci-fi movie sometimes, honestly, Shanteh, when I walk in to some of these movies, and the level of respect you're afforded by simply having those 4 letters after your name is amazing.
Yeah, that's for sure. It is kind of said with a bit of reverence, and you do hear that. You see it from winemakers, you see it from sommeliers. Or when people talk about the research that's happening at the moment, they do say it with a real sense of pride, and I think that's wonderful. And when we think about, I think, the Australian reputation of what we do in this country with grapes is that, we are known for being these incredibly squeaky clean winemakers, in that, we know what's happening, in our vineyards, and we know what's happening in the winemaking facilities itself, to be able to get the most beautiful fruit with all this sunshine into a bottle in perfect condition. And like you said, when it comes to things like smoke taint and all that, the world looks to us. I think that it's just immeasurable what the AWRI has really done, and so much thought goes into each one of those projects getting off the ground. I mean, simply the advanced assessment course for people for personal growth, programs like Showrunner, which has made everybody's lives just that much easier at wine shows. There's just so much that's happening, and I can imagine it's a bloody exciting place to work.
Yeah, it is. And I think, Shanteh, everyone that walks through the door on a daily basis feels like they're there for a purpose, and it really is just to help the Australian wine industry. I mean, we see ourselves as a service body. Like I said, there's a lot, like we do stand on the shoulder of many giants who've worked in our organisation before and discovered and delivered some amazing things for industry, but we think there's still a lot more to do, and we're very conscious of that responsibility to try and keep innovating and try to keep pushing the industry forward. But like I said, I feel like everyone walks through that door every morning with a sense of purpose and pride about what they do.
Well, that's for sure. And the last thing I want to ask you is just a little bit around wine and health, which is another focus for you guys. It's something that I suppose we don't talk about too much, but I do think as people that are in this industry, we have such a responsibility to make sure that we are promoting this wonderful beverage, but with a consciousness to health concerns. And two of the topics for your projects at the moment are dental health for wine tasters, which I take personally very seriously, but also the International Alliance for Responsible Drinking. Another two projects that I think are so wonderful. It just shows, again, the breadth of what you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, some of that's a little historic now, but we certainly, what we need to do around just making sure that people understand that obviously wine and its pH at 3.5 and below can be pretty harmful for some of your teeth, and really understanding the importance of dental hygiene and dental care is critical, and some of that sort of stuff. So yeah, we certainly do that, and we promote some of that stuff when we do our advanced wine assessment courses and those sorts of things, Shanteh, to really make sure people are aware of that. The wine and health area is really critical at the moment. And look, in all honesty, we're not doing enough collectively as an industry in this area at the moment. I think we really need to think about how we approach this. It feels like we're losing the policy debate at this point in time. And what I mean by that is the World Health Organization is certainly pushing quite hard on governments internationally to reduce alcohol consumption. And that's challenging, of course, for our industry because, we're now seeing, I don't know if you realise, but globally, and this is from the IOV's data, in 2024 data, and they reported that was actually the lowest level of global wine consumption since 1961. So we're certainly seeing a decrease in wine consumption globally. And that's been driven by, like I said, a lot of the policy positions that some of the governments have taken around alcohol and health. And so we've got to be, careful and conscious about the potential harm that our product does do, but also, making sure that we're balancing some of these policy arguments with good science from both sides in terms of what that does. So, I think in my mind, there's still, I think we've got to be really conscious about promoting safe consumption and, within certain guidelines. But we've got to be careful about making sure that, like I said, those policy positions that have been taken by government are backed up by good science. And I do worry that the balance of that pro versus con data in relation to alcohol consumption is probably tipping on the side of the teetotalers at the moment.
Yeah, it's so much food for thought, isn't it? And when you think back, 1961, the escalation of the Cold War was when we're comparing the wine consumption to. That is certainly topical and concerning, I suppose. But I'd love to know, what more can people do to support the AWRI, and what more is there that they can get involved? I did notice there was something the other day on the website that you can sign up just simply for tasting, and kind of anybody can do that. But is there more that we can be doing to support you?
Yeah, look, we're always looking for people to participate in our tasting panels. There's a fairly rigorous screening process, be warned, in terms of getting selected as one of our tasters, because we're always making sure that you can taste the things that we're interested in. And believe it or not, there's quite a few people that can't taste all the things that we're interested in. So yeah, we're always interested in getting involvement. Look, for us, we're always about just trying to engage with industry to make sure we can tailor and improve our product and service offering. So really making sure if there is any, constructive feedback, we're always very much open to, again, how we can improve our services, like the help desk service or the library service or whatever we do in those particular places as well. But, I think for us, like I said, we very much see ourselves, Shanteh, as a service provider for the industry. So it's all about making sure we listen carefully and tailor our services to meet their needs.
Well, there's certainly a lot for people to get online and look at the website, because there's a wealth of knowledge on there and what's happening. You seem like a pretty good stand-up guy, so I'm sure now if somebody sees you in a room, they won't feel too afraid to come up and introduce themselves. But Mark, I'd like to know a little bit about your palate as well, especially as somebody that's come from essential oils. You had to use your senses there. No doubt you have to use your senses now. If you could only drink 3 drinks for the rest of your life, what would they be?
Oh, wow. Well, I think number one is I really love Pinot and Chardonnay. So I love all wines. I love all my children equally. But I do have a particular bent towards Pinot after spending quite a bit of time in Tassie and Yarra Valley and Mornington over the years. So I really do enjoy my range of Pinots. And Chardonnay too. I really think that we do produce world-class Chardonnay in Australia, and we should be really, really proud of that. We produce a lot of world-class wines, by the way, but I really love some of the Chardonnays that we're producing, whether it be, like I said, from the Yarra, Mornington, Tassie or Adelaide Hills. I think we've got some amazing styles of those two things there. But what I really love is also what we're doing in that alternative variety space. So, our willingness to experiment with some of these different genetics from overseas, so I think, with what's been going on in some of the, whether it be McLaren Vale with Fiano or some of the work that Steve Pennell's doing in some of the Greek varieties, Zinamavro, I think some of those things are really cool. But also in our hot climates, with what the Chalmers families are doing and Ashley Ratcliffe with Ricatera are doing, and some of those, really well-suited varieties that are making some amazing styles of wine, I think, as well.
Yeah, and changing kind of what we think about wine, I think, as well, and where it can go, and opening new doors, which is so important, as you know. Mark, I've loved our chat. Thank you so much for the work and for all the board, for the work that they do. Most of it's mind-boggling to me, but I certainly appreciate the whole history of the AWRI, and we wouldn't be where we are without it. So thank you so much. And thank you for making some time to chat with me about it.
Yeah, no problem, Shanteh. And look, please, if you're in Adelaide, we'd love to host you and take you around. And that also goes for a lot of the industry people that might be listening. We always try and show people around just to give them an idea about what does go on behind the silver doors of the AWRI.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Mark. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Cheers to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Shanteh. Take care.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram @overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.